One of the ways we educate our clients to understand themselves, especially if they're coming to the table wanting to understand, like, why do I have these compulsive sexual behaviors? Why can't I stop? Is we externalize the addiction part. Now, one of the reasons we do this is it's really helpful in understanding the behaviors and identifying them. One risk that you take in doing that, though, is it can feel like you're absolving yourself of responsibility. So you'll hear things like, well, that's my addict. My addict was doing that. That is not a helpful way, especially if you're in a relationship with somebody who's been hurt by your addictive behaviors. And what that's going to feel like is really a minimization of truly understanding the pain that you've caused. Whereas that language can be more helpful for yourself and understanding yourself so that you can come back and take ownership at the table of the relationship. And so what I really like to talk about today is the difference between what true accountability sounds like versus performance. So when we think about performance, we can think about it through that lens of that addict part. If that performance aspect is showing up in the relationship, we attribute that to the addict part of the individual. They are still responsible for it. They are still doing those behaviors. They are not absolved of the consequences of those actions. They are not absolved of how those make others feel in their lives. It's still all theirs to own and take responsibility for and change. Using that language, the addict, though, is only there to help the individual who's struggling with it understand. It is not there for the other person to say, oh, okay, that wasn't you. That was this magical little person over here that I'm not in a relationship with. No, you are in the relationship with the addict. And so the individual who has the addiction needs to take ownership of that part, needs to take responsibility for its actions, and needs to accept the consequences that come with the actions and how they harm other people. Specifically, though, around this idea of accountability. We talk a lot about this in early recovery, is building a community of accountability. One issue that I found with that word accountability is it's often interpreted as I need to find people who are willing to ask me the tough questions. If you're looking for people to be responsible to ask you the tough questions, you're just doing probably the same thing that you've been doing in your relationship, where you've leaned on maybe a spouse or a partner to ask you if you're looking at pornography or ask you if you're acting out in order for you to get honest. That's not how this works. Accountability isn't finding the right people who are good at asking you the right questions. Accountability is finding the people who you can go to and be honest with, and you can be accountable to. Building healthy relationships with individuals, yes, who maybe are willing to ask tough questions or let you know that they're not really buying what you're selling, but ultimately it is the responsibility of the individual to be accountable to those he's chosen to be in relationship with. So I want to talk a little bit about what accountability actually sounds like versus what kind of more of a performative sense of recovery may sound like. True accountability in the simplest form sounds like this. I was wrong for doing XYZ. That phrase, I was wrong, really pigeonholes the addict in a framework where there's no way out. All you're doing is recognizing, like, I was wrong. You're taking full and whole responsibility for the action. But empathy comes after accountability. It doesn't come before. So really building on the foundation of true accountability is important if your goal is to actually access an empathetic posture towards your partner. So we talked about one aspect is I was wrong. What I see in more performers in the performance recovery is individuals who plead with their partner in a kind of profusely apologizing. I'm so sorry. I'm such a piece of crap. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to lie. I'm so sorry. That'll never happen again. Almost begging their partner to kind of move on is really how I experience that with my clients. They're pleading with their partner. Can't you see that I feel terrible for what I've done? And I'm acknowledging not what I did, but I'm acknowledging that I am terrible. Not my actions, but me as an individual. And really what this is doing is the addict is taking their shame and they're placing it on their partner's lap, because what they're doing is essentially saying, please don't hit me while I'm down. And that's what you kind of see in more of that performance aspect. Now, this can also sound a lot of different ways too. I often hear that phrase, I didn't mean to. In my work with clients, we focus on impact, not intention. And if you hear your partner who may be struggling with addiction emphasizing their intentions in life, what that means is they're neglecting the impact. They're truly not trying to focus on what has been the impact of my actions. They want everybody to look over here. Hey, look over here. I'm not that bad of a guy. Even though I might be saying I'm a bad guy, it's really important that you don't see me as a bad guy. You cannot see me as a bad guy because if you see me as a bad guy, I'm not going to be okay. And really, ultimately, what recovery is about for me is changing how you see me, not me changing. And so, if you can shift that kind of performative language over to this other side of true accountability, you hear things like, I was wrong. You get rid of all of the contextual shit from talking about what would happen. You're not worried about all of the details. You're just owning the behaviors in your actions and saying, here's what I did. You're telling the truth. You're not saying, I was just feeling so stressed and that's why I did it. You're not giving excuses or reasons as to why. You're just saying, here's what I did. Your partner may be curious as to what was going on, but allow them to ask for that information. Don't offer it up freely because if that's the case, you're moving towards performance and trying to manage your image and how others see you versus just camping out in true accountability, which again just simply says, I was wrong for doing X, Y, and Z. I would really encourage you to practice this strategy. It can be really simple or silly, but it actually is quite uncomfortable for people who have never truly been accountable to just camp out in that I was wrong. Almost anytime you want to say, I'm sorry, to replace the I'm sorries with I was wrong. I see that I hurt you. I see that this is having an impact on you. And for that, I'm wrong. I'm wrong for putting you in this position. I'm wrong for doing this to you. And what you're also acknowledging in that moment is I'm going to accept the consequences of my actions. Addicts struggle so much with accountability because it flies in the face of allowing that addiction to survive. And so if your goal is truly to stop these compulsive behaviors and understand the addiction, you have to move towards accountability and put yourself in positions and places where that's going to be fostered. And so, yes, it might mean finding people who are in recovery that are really good at accountability. Cling to those people. But what it also means is really where it matters the most in your relationship, where all of the pain is being experienced, it really needs to show up there. And you need to practice accountability by changing the way that you talk about what you're doing.